They finally cracked what was hidden inside the mesa. What came out of it wasn't ready to be found, and it made that clear immediately. For decades, the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch had been treated as the epicenter of everything strange on the property. More light sightings than anywhere else on the land, more instrument failures, more reports of a low, persistent hum that residents miles away swore they could feel rather than hear. Ground radar surveys had already confirmed something researchers couldn't ignore. A network of structured cavities running beneath the mesa, too consistent in shape and depth to be dismissed as ordinary geology. So the team made the call. After years of scans, theories, and cautious planning, they moved forward with a controlled excavation, determined to finally see with their own eyes what had been generating so much unexplained activity for so long. The dig went exactly according to plan, right up until it didn't. Equipment logs show a sudden, violent spike in electromagnetic readings the moment drilling broke through into open space below. Handheld devices reportedly failed within seconds. 2 members of the crew described a wave of pressure in their ears, like a change in altitude happening all at once, followed immediately by movement from inside the newly opened cavity. Fast, deliberate, and clearly not the reaction of something that wanted to be observed. Within moments, the excavation site became a retreat. Whatever was inside that opening didn't wait to be studied. It reacted first, and it reacted hard, sending a full research crew scrambling backward from a discovery they had waited years to make. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A moment where every instinct told you to move before your mind even understood why. What's the creepiest unsolved mystery you've ever heard of? Because this one didn't stay buried for long once someone finally went looking. Let's back up, because to understand why this moment hit so hard, you need to understand exactly what this mesa represents to everyone who has ever studied Skinwalker Ranch. Skinwalker Ranch sits on 512 acres in the Uinta Basin of northeastern Utah, a stretch of land that has carried a reputation for the unexplained for well over 2 centuries. Long before scientists, sensors, or television crews arrived, indigenous communities in the region treated this land with a caution that bordered on avoidance entirely after dark. The name attached to the property comes from a belief in shape-shifting entities capable of moving between forms. A story passed down not as entertainment, but as a genuine warning. Within that larger property, one location has always stood apart from the rest: the mesa, a flat-topped landform locals nicknamed home base decades ago due to the sheer concentration of unexplained light activity reported directly above and around it, where the rest of the ranch has produced scattered, unpredictable incidents over the years. The mesa has produced something closer to a pattern: recurring lights, recurring equipment malfunctions, and recurring reports from multiple, unrelated research teams pointing back to the exact same coordinates. When the Sherman family owned the property in the mid-1990s, they described the mesa as the source of some of their most disturbing encounters. Lights that split apart mid-air, and a persistent sense, shared by multiple family members independently, that something was always watching from that specific direction of the property, regardless of where else they were standing. After Robert Bigelow purchased the ranch in 1996 and quietly built out a full research operation, the mesa became the primary focus of long-term instrumentation. Magnetometers, ground-penetrating radar, and continuous camera coverage were concentrated there specifically, because early data made it clear that whatever was happening across the rest of the property was happening most intensely at this one location. By the time new ownership brought television cameras onto the property in 2016, ground radar surveys had already confirmed something that changed the entire direction of the investigation: a series of underground cavities running beneath the mesa, with a level of structural consistency that geologists struggled to explain through natural processes alone. Repeating shapes, consistent depths, formations that lined up with each other in ways that didn't look like the product of millions of years of random erosion. For years, the research team studied this data from a distance, scanning, mapping, and theorizing, but never physically breaking through into the space itself. That changed with the decision to move forward with a fully permitted, carefully planned excavation, designed specifically to answer the question that had lingered over this property for decades. What exactly is generating all of this activity, concentrated so precisely in one place? Do you think the government already knows more than they're letting on about locations like this? Because the mesa's activity pattern is exactly the kind that historically draws attention from agencies, far beyond a private research team. According to internal accounts and equipment logs reviewed after the incident, the excavation proceeded normally for the first several hours. Drilling equipment moved through layered rock consistent with prior survey data, with sensor readings tracking steadily alongside the depth of the dig. Then, in the final stretch before breaking through into the mapped cavity, readings across nearly every instrument on site began climbing sharply and simultaneously. Magnetometers, thermal sensors, and even basic handheld electronics, all registering interference, well beyond anything previously recorded at this location. The moment drilling broke through into the open cavity below, that spike became something closer to a spasm. Multiple instruments failed outright within seconds. Crew members closest to the site described a sudden pressure change, similar to a rapid shift in altitude, followed almost immediately by audible movement from within the newly exposed space. Not the settling sound of loose rock or displaced soil, but something with weight, direction, and speed. What happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds, according to those present. Whatever was inside that cavity didn't wait to be examined. It moved toward the opening, not away from it, closing the distance between itself and the surface far faster than anyone standing there expected anything to move. The crew's decision to retreat wasn't a calculated, gradual withdrawal. It was immediate, instinctive, and by every account, entirely necessary. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Something that stripped away every ounce of preparation you thought you had, and left you reacting on pure instinct instead? That's precisely the position this crew found themselves in, despite years of training and planning specifically for a moment like this one. So what actually happened down there? Let's walk through the leading explanations, because this incident, more than almost any other on the property, has produced genuine disagreement, even among researchers, who generally align on how to interpret the ranch's activity. The first explanation centers on trapped gas release. Underground cavities, especially ones connected to complex mineral deposits, can sometimes hold pockets of pressurized gas that release suddenly when disturbed by drilling. A rapid gas release could account for the pressure change crew members described, and, combined with panic, adrenaline, and low visibility inside a freshly opened cavity, it's possible that the perceived movement was actually debris, dust, or displaced material reacting to that sudden pressure shift, rather than anything biological at all. The second explanation returns to the mesa's well-documented electromagnetic behavior. If the underground cavity network is connected to whatever is generating the property's persistent magnetic anomalies, breaking through into that space directly may have triggered an intense, localized surge, one strong enough to interfere with every piece of nearby equipment simultaneously, and potentially strong enough to produce genuine sensory disruption in the crew members closest to the opening. Under this theory, what they experienced wasn't an external creature reacting to them, but their own senses reacting to an environment suddenly flooded with unprecedented electromagnetic intensity. The third explanation is the one that has generated the most serious internal debate, because it doesn't try to explain away the crew's account, it takes it at face value. Under this theory, the cavity network beneath the mesa isn't simply geological, and it isn't empty, it's occupied. Whatever produced decades of light activity, equipment interference, and unexplained sightings above ground has been operating from directly beneath this specific point the entire time. And the excavation didn't uncover an empty structure. It broke into an active space that reacted immediately and defensively to the intrusion. What kind of mysteries do you enjoy most? The kind with a tidy scientific explanation waiting at the end, or the kind that leave you with more questions than you started with? Because depending on which explanation you find most convincing here, this incident sits very differently in your mind. In the days following the event, the research team reportedly withdrew from the immediate area entirely, prioritizing crew safety over continued excavation. Equipment left behind at the site was later retrieved, and found to be non-functional in several cases, with internal components showing damage consistent with an extreme, sudden electromagnetic surge rather than physical impact or environmental wear. Follow-up surveys using remote sensing rather than direct physical entry have suggested the cavity remains open beneath the surface, though its exact current dimensions are difficult to determine given the same interference that disrupted equipment during the original incident. Whether anything is still moving within that space is, as of the most recent updates from the research team, still an open and actively debated question. It's worth placing this incident alongside the broader history of the property, because it doesn't stand entirely alone. Over the years, multiple research teams working different sections of the ranch have described a recurring pattern. Periods of intense, escalating instrument activity that build steadily, followed by a single sharp event that seems to mark some kind of threshold being crossed. Longtime investigators have come to recognize this buildup as a warning sign in itself, a signal that whatever is generating the anomaly is approaching some kind of limit. What sets the Mesa incident apart is the directness of the response. Previous escalations on the property, including several documented during the Sherman family's time there, tended to unfold gradually, with lights intensifying over hours or cattle incidents occurring in clusters over several nights. This event compressed that entire pattern into a matter of seconds, moving from a stable, methodically planned excavation to a full emergency retreat almost instantly, with no gradual buildup that gave the crew time to adjust or reconsider. Independent researchers who reviewed portions of the sensor data afterward, without direct involvement in the original excavation, have offered mixed reactions. Some have pointed to precedent elsewhere in geological literature, arguing that rapid gas release, combined with electromagnetic interference from mineral deposits could, in theory, produce an event this abrupt and this severe, without requiring anything beyond known physical processes. Others have pushed back, noting that the specific combination of simultaneous, near-total equipment failure across multiple independent device types is difficult to reconcile with gas release alone, since gas pressure changes typically wouldn't account for interference in devices that weren't in direct physical contact with the disturbed area. That disagreement, notably, hasn't been resolved by additional data, because very little additional data exists. The same interference that disabled equipment during the incident has made follow-up monitoring of the exact site significantly more difficult, forcing the research team to rely on less precise remote methods, rather than the direct instrumentation they'd normally use to investigate an anomaly this significant. For a property that has spent decades slowly accumulating credibility through patient, methodical documentation, this incident represents something of a turning point. The first time in recent memory that the investigation itself appeared to trigger an immediate, forceful reaction, rather than simply observing and recording activity that occurred largely on its own timeline. That shift, more than the incident's individual details, is what has left even experienced researchers on the team recalibrating how they approach the Mesa going forward. Take a second and actually put yourself in that crew's position. You've spent years working toward this exact moment. Years of scans, theories, and careful planning, all building toward finally understanding what's been generating so much unexplained activity in one specific location. And then, the instant you finally break through, instead of answers, you get a reaction. Fast, deliberate. Aim directly at the opening you just created. Would you have the composure to keep recording? To keep documenting, driven by the scientific instinct to capture everything, regardless of personal risk? Or would every instinct in your body already have you moving backward, prioritizing survival over data, the same way this crew reportedly did? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, and it's exactly the question this research team has had to sit with in the aftermath. Not just what they encountered, but what it revealed about their own instincts when genuinely confronted with something outside their frame of reference. Skeptics, reasonably, want more before drawing firm conclusions. They want full, unedited equipment logs. They want independent geological analysis of the site, conducted without the involvement of the original research team. And they want a clearer account of exactly what crew members saw, rather than descriptions shaped after the fact by adrenaline, fear, and the property's already loaded reputation. That skepticism is warranted, especially given how frequently claims from this location have been exaggerated or embellished in the retelling over the years. But even among those inclined toward caution, there's broad agreement that the instrumentation data alone, the severe equipment failure across multiple independent devices, represents something genuinely unusual, regardless of how the more dramatic elements of the account are ultimately interpreted. Here's what we know for certain. A carefully planned, fully instrumented excavation beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch triggered an immediate severe reaction that damaged equipment, forced an emergency retreat, and has not been fully explained by any single conventional theory offered so far. Here's what we still don't know. Whether that reaction came from trapped gas, an intense electromagnetic surge, or something occupying that space that has been there far longer than any research team studying it. And whether the opening created that day is still connected to whatever has been producing this property's most persistent, most concentrated unexplained activity for decades. Research on the mesa continues, though far more cautiously than before. According to those closest to the investigation, no team has yet attempted a second direct excavation at the same site, and current plans favor remote, non-invasive methods until far more is understood about what, exactly, reacted so forcefully the first time. That caution extends beyond equipment choices. Several members of the team have reportedly requested reassignment away from the mesa specifically, a request unusual enough that it's been noted internally as a shift in morale, rather than simply a scheduling preference. For a group of researchers who have spent years building their careers around documenting the unexplained, a request like that carries weight. It suggests something about this particular event landed differently than the decades of lights, sounds, and secondhand sightings that came before it. There's also the matter of the surrounding community, many of whom have lived alongside this ranch's reputation for their entire lives, without ever needing outside confirmation that something unusual was happening nearby. For them, this incident has functioned less as a revelation and more as a validation. A moment where instrumentation finally caught up to what generations of local residents had already quietly accepted as fact, long before any research team arrived with sensors and funding. That validation, though, comes with its own weight. It's one thing to believe, in the abstract, that something unexplained exists beneath a familiar stretch of land. It's another to have that belief confirmed by equipment failure, emergency retreat, and a research team suddenly far more cautious than they were the week before. A shift that residents nearby have noticed just as clearly as the researchers themselves. If something really did strike back, the moment researchers finally broke through, without hesitation and without warning, what does that tell you about everything else this land has been hiding, quietly, for as long as anyone has been watching it?